Check. Sound check, sound check. Well, welcome to Here and There tonight. Hopefully all is well. And Laura, if you'd give me a sound check now, that would be fantastic. Hopefully it's working. Check, check. Very good. I don't see anyone has locked on at this point. But I'm Tim Ard with Forest Applications Training Incorporated. And tonight we're going to be working on a little project. It's called Here to There. And my thoughts are on this. I've been talking, over the years to a lot of people in training and that have run chainsaws for several years. And I go back and I ask them, where did you learn about chainsaw? Whether it be maintenance or it be operation techniques. And a lot of times it was a parent, sometimes a relative of some. Sometimes it's a next door neighbor working on some firewood project, or it might be that you started a job with a tree care or logging operation. And so somebody, a coworker, picked up and helped you to get available ranks of working with the chainsaw. And so tonight what I'd like to do is, if you're interested, is to be able to log on to Zoom, and you can see on the chat on the screen there's there, or you can send me a message here real quick and I'll send you that link out that you can join in, and we will go from there. I'll ask you a question about where your experiences come from, what do you do, and we'll hopefully record that. And I'm going to be putting together a couple series on Here to There, getting information of chainsaws from one head to the other. That's the idea of it. So hopefully we have some that want to participate. And I've got some items that might interest you. I've got some caps and cross sights and some different things that maybe we can take and send to you for participation. So hope that sparks some interest. But a little bit about myself. I have been working with chainsaws longer, but than 40 years. But I started off working on chainsaws and cutting firewood, and had a dealership for a while. And so I started off in late 70s working on power equipment. And then in the 80s, I had a shop in Georgia, and more or less I repaired a lot of saws and all. I wasn't too good of a businessman, but I then when the shop closed, I went to work for a distributor that had Lombard chainsaws and McCulloch chainsaws in Atlanta. I was driving back and forth several miles a day. But anyway, I worked at a warehouse and parts and customer service there. And they took on the McCulloch distributorship for the southeastern United States, Georgia, Panhandle of Florida, and Alabama. And I was responsible for parts and service and maintenance. And at that time, McCulloch was kind of on the way down. They were working with a lot of different stores, so customer service was challenging. But one of the gentlemen who was with McCulloch, Richard Burchett, and he had been around chainsaws for many years, became a mentor of mine. He more or less left McCulloch, and he had been with Homelight before, and then he worked with McCulloch, and then he left and he became the southeastern manager or Georgia distributor for steel. And we had talked a lot, while he was there, and I more or less decided to take a position there. Started off in the warehouse, ended up designated as the Georgia service manager to Steel Incorporated for steel. And we had the service center there, and more or less then I became involved with a project that Steel had, which was a Soren Eriksson project. And that was a Swedish logging expert who came to the States. They had sold out their company to Electrolux, who was Husqvarna and Jonsered. And they then had Soren on contract to do shows and training around the country. And so I helped out some of them in Georgia. And then he had a program that was starting up nationally with Scott Paper Company and Union Camp and West Vaco. And so I got the opportunity to help with that, more or less taking care of saw issues. Now, Soren and I kind of hit it off. We started working a lot, and I started traveling around where I could for his presentations. He started teaching me on the chainsaw, and I started teaching the portions in his game of logging program that was the sharpening and chainsaw maintenance program called Reduced Downtime. And so we had the program there at Steel going to about 18 different colleges and universities on a collegiate program. And then we had 16, I think, trainers areas across the country. And so we had regional finals with competitions. Soren had a process. He had competition based on all the training. So we applied points to different things of safety and applications. And then we had regional competitions that had prizes and money. And then the winner of that competition regionally could go on to a national finals where we had $10,000 in first place prizes, and everyone that came to that saws and all kinds of things. So anyway, that rocked on for several years, and then in about 1990, we had the gentleman who started the program with Steel, Dave Zerfoss. He left Steel and he became the North American president for Husqvarna. And so we talked with him and we decided to go over. They got behind our game of logging program. They wanted to start one for tree care. And so we started off with what we called Arbor Games to begin with. But I came across two guys up in Ohio doing some training, Ken Palmer and Bob Weber, and then later Rip Tompkins. And more or less Arbor Master training was formed. And I just did the chainsaw portions of it. I'm not much in climbing. But anyhow, we started that up. Husqvarna got behind it. We started doing a lot of traveling and training with that. And that was around 1995 or so. And then I had forced applications. Soren had Soren Eriksson training, and we continued the training going on. And then Husqvarna wanted to start a team of power product specialists. We called it PPS team, and we started training and getting 12 guys as part of that program. And they licensed out my company, and Laura and I, my wife Laura and I, we started managing that team and traveling all over the country with that. And then about 2005, I came down with colon cancer, and well, excuse me, we were still going at 2005. 2008 came down with colon cancer, and so we left Husqvarna and more or less took forced applications back, and so then after that, a few months, I was able to get back out, and we started traveling, and since then. We have been on the road working with city, county, state, some tree care disaster groups, but most of the tree care handled with the arbor master, and the game of logging still going on as it is today. But not as many regional areas, but some very, very good instructors out there that are touching a lot of people. And same thing with the arborist industry with the arbor master training. They all do a great job of taking forth the chainsaw applications portions of it. And so that's kind of my background. We rocked on for about 15 years, and then this past August, I found out that the cancer was back, and so I had the surgery to remove more tumors, and more or less I've been kind of resting and taking it easy since that time, some skin cancers and some things like that. So I've really concentrated, and I kind of started a little bit during the COVID times of putting together some audiovisual equipment and started producing some audiovisual training virtually for some different insurance underwriters and different operations that use chainsaws. And so now that I'm kind of having to stay close to home, we're staying busy putting together those programs. And I'm always interested in how people find out about things and from a standpoint of chainsaws. And sometimes it's by the seat of our pants, there's no doubt. But a lot of times it's information that's passed along from someone that you've become acquainted with. And so you pick up things, you practice them, and you start to work with it. And that's what this is about, getting information from here to there. So I'm hoping we have some check in tonight and give us some outlook of how they got started and what they plan to do with the trainings or the information that they've acquired over the years. And so hopefully start checking in. But I plan to be on just kind of in and out here till about 9 o'clock. So if anyone is interested, we can kind of set up and record it and be able to get some information from you. So looking forward to that. A little bit about what we have going on with forest applications. I have two gentlemen that are working in their spare time. They have some other trainings going on too, but more or less they've become part of our operation since I can't get out and about, and they do an excellent job out in the field. We have a couple hands-on programs that are taking place here in April coming up. The first one, the first weekend of April, first week of April, April the 4th, 2nd through the 4th. And that's going to be a 3-day storm sawing workshop, we call it. It's for basic as well as advanced. It's a lot of hands-on, 3 days worth that we are putting together. The first one in Kingston, Georgia, just outside of Rome, Georgia, at the Breeden Farms. And so we'll be out there the 2nd through the 4th of April. And if you haven't heard about that program, it's 3 days. It goes through about a half a day of classroom, just going over some basic things, and then the rest of the time is spent in the field with felling, limbing, bucking, hangers, storm cleanup type work, and a lot of maintenance, sharpening, those kinds of things. We unpack a lot of information in those 3 days, and we've got a good cutting site to work with. So hopefully that is something that intrigues you. If you have some experience with saws, or if you're new to chainsawing, it's a great way to get some good basics down to begin with. So very important. And then as we get on in the end of April, I think it's April the 25th, 25th, 26th, 27th. Chris Childs will be heading up program. I'll also be up there in Dry Fork, Virginia, and that's not too far from Danville, Virginia. And so that program is also another storm sawing workshop that'll be taking place in those dates. And so that one is kind of on the weekend. The first one's kind of middle of the week. The first one is filled up almost. We've got I think four or five openings still left on that one. We haven't picked up any as far as the sign-ups on the one at the end of April yet. I'm sure it will start filling up pretty soon, but we do have about 8 or 9 folks coming in for that, which is part of our legacy program, and that's what I will be doing up there, and going over with some of the folks who have taken our 2023 and the 2024 legacy instructor program, and that's to take people with experience and that are interested in passing along information, getting it from here to there to others. And so that's the concept of the legacy program. And so that's that one's taking place right now, going on. We finished up one in December last year, and then we'll be finishing up this one, I think the week of April the 22nd, or the April 22nd, Tuesday night, we'll be finishing up. And then we'll have a weekend little cutting planning process and competition with the guys that last weekend in April in Dry Fork, Virginia. I also have some online sessions, which I've had a couple of them so far. That's a 2-hour basic chainsaw. It is a certification course. You do get a certificate for it. It covers just the basics, introduction to chainsaw and maintenance and sharpening, and personal protective gear, those kinds of things. And I've had a lot of new operators that have bought saws, getting ready for the fall and the firewood season and cleanup spring season, and so they've checked in, and I've had 2 of those classes. I've got another one be coming up on let's see, the next one is going to be April the 22nd. That will be the next 2-hour basic chainsaw session that you can sign up for. And then on March the 25th, March the 25th, I'm going to be holding a 1-hour saw chain clinic. And that's going to be talking about different sizes, styles, types of saw chain, as well as sharpening tools and techniques, going over some things. It'll probably run a little longer than an hour, but I set it up as an hour program. And so if you're interested in learning more about saw chain, I've got a few tips and tricks that people have shared with me over the years. So it might be something that would interest you. And also I do have ability to set up consultative training. So if you've got certain topics that you would like to know more about, I'll try to put something together for you. If I don't know it myself, I can probably get a hold of somebody who can, with all the years I've been messing around with this. but a lot of folks out there. So if you're interested in that, that's also available. You can get in touch with me at info@forestapps.com, and that I'll get back in touch with you. Or you can check on our e-store, and that's off of our website. There's a link. It's in Spotify too. If you just put in Forest Applications Training or Tim Ard, it will come up. But it's an e-store on Shopify, excuse me, not Spotify, Shopify. And so all the information is on there, and you can register and pay online for those. So if you are interested, check here and see if there's anything up. If you're watching and interested in chatting a little bit about your experience with chainsaws and who taught you, if you can see on the chat, there is a link to a Zoom meeting. You can touch in on that, and more or less we'll connect and be able to ask you questions and answer a little bit. And hopefully it'll help out some other people in the future as far as chainsaw training and safety goes, give them an idea of how you learned and what you learned with, whether it was a training class that you went to, or somebody who was a neighbor or a parent or someone who passed along information to you. And that's really what it's all about, sharing it, getting that information from here to there. And so that's what we want to discuss here tonight. Who see here a little story. You run this little story. It's called Safety Old Sam. Well, I don't think that one's picking up. Never a dull moment. Oh, I think I know. See if it'll play here now. Nope.
And that is, what is an accident?
There it is. I think we got it here now.
And then what is safety? And I wanted to share with you a little story. I've really never put it in a video, but it has to do with what safety is. A guy named Doug Duncan, who was safety and training with the North Carolina Forestry Association back years ago, and he shared it with me after I finished up a talk on the personal protective at that workshop. But he went on to tell me the story, and it really highlights what safety is all about. He said a couple they had met in the Army, and they were in on 6-year term, and more or less they enjoyed the outdoors. So constantly, every spare minute they had, they were going camping or hiking or biking or fishing or whatever. I wanted to share with you one little story, probably the late 80s, early 90s. I was asked to do a presentation in North Carolina, and it was about personal protective equipment and logging. Put it in a video, but it has to do with what safety is, and it was shared with me from a guy named Doug Duncan, who was safety and training with the North Carolina Forestry Association back years ago, and he shared it with me after I finished up a talk on the personal protective at that workshop. But he went on to tell me the story, and it really highlights what safety is all about. He said a couple they had met in the Army, and they were in on 6-year term, and more or less they enjoyed the outdoors. So constantly, every spare minute they had, they were whatever. And they were getting close to the end of their 6-year term, and they had kind of fallen in love. They decided to get married, and their idea was that they were going to buy a piece of property there on a lake in North Carolina and build a little cabin on it, and then basically hunt and fish the rest of their days, or at least till they ran out of money. And sure enough, they got their cabin finished. They had checked into it, been in about four months or so, and they had met a group down at a local restaurant. And they'd go in every morning and eat biscuits and drink coffee, and they had a whole group there that would sit around and talk about the big fish and the big bucks, and then they'd go out hunting or fishing, come back and have a whole new set of stories the next morning. They said it was a real fun group to be around. Well, one morning they were sitting there talking, and a terrible storm blew in. Wind, rain, lightning. Wasn't a real pretty day, and had one of the guys stood up, said, I think I'm going to go on to work today and get a few things caught up so I'll have more time to hit the lake just as soon as this weather breaks. Said another one stood up, said, yeah, me too. I've got some things to get done around the house, so I think I'm going to get that done, and then I'm going to hit the water because the fish ought to be tearing it up. He said pretty soon they were sitting there by themselves. Didn't really think about it, but he said, maybe I ought to find me a good part-time job, something to do on these bad weather days, have a little extra gas money for the boat. And he said, I'm going to check around and see what I can find. So he started looking around the next couple of days and hadn't really found anything. He got to the restaurant by himself the next morning. He was sitting there reading the newspaper, and in a little classified ad, it said, game warden wanted part-time. He said, that could be pretty good for me. He said, in the military, he said, actually, I was law enforcement. I was an MP my whole term. And then hunting and fishing is definitely right up my alley. And all he wants something part-time. He said, this could work out pretty good. I think I'll go down and talk to him. So that was on Wednesday evening. Thursday morning, got all his paperwork together, went down and found the gentleman's desk, and he laid all his paperwork out, his resume, and the game warden looked over it just a second. He said, man, you can start today. He said, you're exactly what I'm looking for. He said, with your background with the military and the law enforcement, then the hunting and fishing, he said, this could work out so good, and all I've got budget for is part-time, so this could really work great for both of us. He said, you can start today. Well, he told him and said, I hadn't really planned on starting today. He said, I got a little fishing trip planned this weekend, but he said, if you let me start Monday, he said, I'll take the job. So sure enough, they worked it out, and game warden's a little happy. He's got him some help coming in Monday, and yeah, he got his part-time job that he wanted, and so they were both happy. Well, Friday he got everything packed up. He was going to head out of town on his trip, and he said, I think I'm going to drop by the restaurant this morning and tell my buddies about the new job I've got. They'll be excited for me. So he had everything packed up, so he drove on down the restaurant, and he said, got out, and just about the time he started to open the front door handle, though, he said it hit him like a stick right beside the head. He said, I didn't think about this. He said, I wonder what my buddy's going to think sitting down to breakfast every morning with the game warden. He said, I might have really screwed up. They may not want to talk about the big fish and the big bucks with me sitting there at the table. So he laughed about it a little bit, but he came up with a good plan. He went in, sat down, and waited for just the right moment, listened to a few stories, and then he said, folks got something to share with you today. They said, what is it? He said, well, I've got me a good part-time job. They said, that's awesome. What you going to be doing? He said, well, actually, I'm the new game warden. And as he thought, he said, everybody just kind of stared at him. And I said, I know it's none of you here at the table that's breaking the rules, but there are people out there hunting and fishing without a license. He said, it's my job to catch them now. And he said, if you'll just help me. And his plan was, he pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. He said, let's make a list of those I need to go after first. And about the same time, they hollered out, Old Man Sam. And they said, he's always got fresh meat on the table, never had a license in his life. He said, that's the one you got to catch first. But naturally, they had a long list, so he had a lot of work to do ahead of him. Well, to make a long story short, he had his list of folks now, and he got to thinking about where everybody was located, and he started to look around the lake, and he found Old Man Sam's cabin was right across the lake from his. He said, I think I'm going to start off with the big one first tomorrow. He said, I'm going to go after Old Sam, see if I can catch him first off. So he got up early the next morning, about 4:30, drove over. He parked his truck where nobody could watch him. He said, he's standing there and watching. About 4:45, the lights come on. He said, Old Sam is going to be going out today. He said, I'm going to get him today. He said, about 5 o'clock, old gentleman come out on the porch, had a cup of coffee in his hand, stretched a little bit, said just as loud as he could, he said, Mr. Game Warden. He said, no, you're out there watching me today. He said, I'm not going anywhere today. He said, come on down. I hadn't met you yet. Let's talk. Game warden said, I can't believe it. He said, I didn't tell a soul. He said, must be one of those guys at the restaurant, though, that's playing a trick on me. They know who's on the list. They're calling these people as soon as they see me leaving the house. He said, somebody's a snitch. Well, he was a little embarrassed, but he went on down, met old Sam there on the porch. They started talking about the big fish and the big bucks, but he said, more you got talking with him. He said, he knew I was there. He said, somebody had to call him and alert him. Well, they talked for a long time, a little bit embarrassed. He left, and next couple of days, he's kind of listening around, trying to figure out who this snitch might be so he could get back on his business for that big list. He said, didn't really come up with anybody. He said, well, A couple days later, maybe it was just a fluke thing. He said, maybe old man Sam just guessed. He said, I'm going to try him again in the morning, see if I can surprise him. So he got up early the next morning, goes over, parks his truck in a different spot. About 5 o'clock, he's watching old Sam's cabin. He said, old Sam, come back out on the front porch again, looks almost straight up the hill at him, said just as loud as he could. He said, Mr. Game Warden. He said, no, you out there watching me again today? But he said, I'm not going anywhere today either. He said, come on down. I enjoyed your visit the other day. Let's do it again. So embarrassed, he just turned around and left, didn't even go down. He said, I got to figure out who this snitch is so I can catch him and the rest of this list. Well, about 3 or 4 days later, he was sitting there in the restaurant, and he was gotten there for everybody had, and he was kind of going over what he's going to do for the day. The guy would kind of always sit over in the corner. He came up there to him, and this guy's not really part of their table. He's always over in the corner eating breakfast, but not really part of their group. So he said, this guy might be the snitch. He said, he's always over there. He might have overheard my list. Anyway, the gentleman came over to him. He said, Mr. Game Warden, he said, you know old Sam, don't you? His ears kind of perked up. He said, yeah, I met him one time. Why do you ask? He said, well, I didn't know if you knew it or not, but I'm kind of friends with old Sam's family. And they called me yesterday, said they had to put old Sam in the hospital. He said, he thinks the world of you. He's been talking about you a lot the past couple of weeks. You ought to go down and visit with him. It'd make his day. He said, well, I'll get down there this afternoon and visit with him. So he got down to the hospital that afternoon and found old Sam's room. He knocked on the door, went inside. Old Sam's eyes lit up. They started talking about the big fish and the big bucks. But the more he got talking with him, he said, this guy doesn't look too good. He said, if he checks out of here the wrong way, he said, I'm never going to figure out who this snitch is. So he said, I think I'm going to ask him, see if he'll help me out. Maybe he'll help me figure out who this snitch is. So he said, Mr. Sam, he said, you remember that first day we met? He said, yeah, son, I appreciate you coming by the house and all. He said, well, I got to kind of ask you a personal question. He said, well, anything, I'll try to answer it. He said, I got to know who called you and told you I was coming to see you that day. He said, what do you mean? He said, well, somebody had to call you. You know I was out there and stuff. I just got to know who it is. He said, well, son, I don't know of anybody calling me. He said, well, I came back again a few days later and you knew I was out there. He said, somebody had to call you and alert you I was out and about. I just got to know, who is it? He said, well, son, I don't know of anybody calling. He said, well, you came out on the porch, hollered for me both times. He said, somebody had to call you and alert you I was out and about. He said, well, son, I don't know of anybody calling. But he said, as far as hollering off the porch, he said, I start my day that way every morning. And, I kind of chuckled a little bit. I don't know that I caught on to it completely. But then Doug said something to me that kind of stuck with me, and I've really thought about this for many years. He said, one thing old man Sam recognized forefront every morning was the opposition was out there somewhere. He said, think about it. How can you ever put it in your planning process to keep unplanned events, an accident from happening, if you're not aware of those things that cause them? And that kind of stuck with me. That's really what safety is all about, isn't it? It's an awareness. It's an understanding. And I guess, Soren Erickson always used to say that the best thing that you can do is have experience. You need experience. But he said, you really have to think about there's two different kinds of experience. There's good ones and there's bad ones. He said, you want to learn the good ones on your own. You want to learn the bad ones from somebody else. And that's something where, an accident is an unplanned event. But safety is being aware of what can cause those accidents. I hope you picked up something from that story to think about. And it's really what safety is all about as we travel along this Forest Apps Road. Y'all have a great one.
I hope you're able to pick that up a little bit. And that's kind of an interesting story that was shared with me years and years ago, and I've told it thousands of times, I think. But it is what safety is all about. It's something of putting together a plan to keep those unplanned events from happening, and that's what it has to take to to get everything, working correctly. So you don't want those unplanned events there, that's for sure. Let's see if anybody dropped by. Very good. Well, if you are interested tonight, if you see this, you can look at one of the chats, and there's a Zoom meeting invitation on there for you to log in, and we'll discuss a little bit about what your experience is as far as chainsaws, who taught you, where did you learn it, seat of your pants, or from a friend or coworker or relative. How did you pick up what you know about chainsawing? I have putting together a thing I'm calling the From Here to There project, and that's trying to get information from here, which would be one head to the other, trying to see how people have learned and what we need to kind of focus in on as programs are coming together for chainsaw operators in the future. I watch a lot on YouTube and Facebook and different things, and talk to a lot of people on the road training. And when I go through a lot of things and hear the different experiences that they have. Some people got started picking up on training because of wanting to keep incidents from happening, or maybe they had an incident or know of somebody close that had one, and they want to kind of brush up themselves to make sure that they're working safe out there and staying up with some of the latest techniques. And that's kind of what it's all about. And so we're thinking through that process as we put together programs, and hopefully that's something that can help us, is understanding what you went through or how you learned it, and kind of go from there. So looking forward to, over the next couple hours, talking to some people and coming up with some understandings of how that works out in the field. And so I have found that a lot of times people don't know what they don't know, and it's kind of tough sometimes to learn things completely on your own. But sharing with friends and then even training classes and things like that can help you to pick up things quickly. Statistically, there's a lot of injuries with chainsaws that happen in the first hours of operation, where people aren't aware of the reactive forces of the saw. But the biggest injuries that take place are generally from whatever the material is that you're cutting, whether you're felling trees or bucking up things and things roll, or you're out there cleaning up after a storm and there's other limbs that are hanging, and all of a sudden there's a struck by situation because some limb dislodged and fell, or you're pushing brush or pulling brush, or pulling and chaining or roping and all this kind of thing, and you start moving wood and things start to come about in different directions. So it's important to have a planning process to work with. And that's where Soren kind of got me started, is looking at 5 steps. And we put together the Game of Logging program, and Arbor Master also is thinking about the process of what do you need in a checklist, a quick checklist. And so Soren always said, it's easy to do there. You got 5 parts there to your hand, and you can be able to think through the process. Like in felling trees, we looking around for hazards and obstacles. And then we take and think about the liens of the tree. There's 2 of them. And that's something that I see a lot of times if you watch a lot of videos, that you see kind of what the results are, but people don't really share with you all that much about what their planning process was. So you don't know whether it worked right or not. You see it hit the ground, they're still walking, and that's a good thing. But it's something that, to be productive at something and to be efficient and work safely is having a plan. And a lot of people just automatically do it. I mean, it's constantly working in their brains as far as the planning process, and their experience over the years has made them aware of different issues, and so they're constantly looking for those hazards that could affect them, or different situations on the tree with rod or vines or intertwined limbs or dead trees or green trees and all this kind of stuff, to be able to take and make sure that they don't miss any of that process in their plan. because if they do, then it could become an unplanned event. So, but as we start to think about how did you learn that information? How long did it take you? And a lot of times being able to share with somebody else or going through some type of a class or reading or watching a video or whatever, you can be able to take and formalize a more or less a plan very quickly, and that can aid in your efficiency and be able to take and work faster as well as maintaining the safety. And so I mentioned, in the first few days of chainsaw operation with new operators, or it might be really in the first 6 weeks to 6 months on the job for professionals. And a lot of people throw around the thing of being a professional, but it's something when you start to really look at it, that professionalism is being paid for what you do. So whether you're working for a city, county, state, tree care, you're helping somebody, selling firewood, you're being paid for what you do. So you're a professional. And it's important as a professional to maximize your safety, because you're one of the only ones that's making a living off of it. So if you get hurt, your your family and friends, they become kind of dependent sometimes on what you do, and so it's important to try to stay as safe and healthy out there as possible. And so that's one thing that we start to look at. If you're a professional, you should be thinking through, what is your training, staying up to date with it, making sure that you understand where the risks are, and also different tools that can help you. And in the arborist side of it, there's all kinds of climbing and rigging and those kinds of things, but more and more people are starting to pay attention to personal protective equipment and making sure they're protecting themselves. That's really the cheapest insurance that you can possibly get, is thinking through that when it comes to it. I'm saying an accident is an unplanned event, then it's thinking through that, hey, anything could happen if I miss something in my plan. So that's your first form of counteracting any kind of an injury or safety situation. But your second follow up there is your best insurance, and that's PPE, personal protective equipment. And so understanding what's out there and available, and you work towards putting that into your arsenal of defense. And so that's something to think through. Then later chainsaws, and making sure that they're maintained properly and the safety features are kept acquainted, and you understand how to work with those and what to do and maintain them. And those are all things that help us to be able to work more efficiently. And so those are all parts of your plan as you go down through it. But then those liens that I talked about, there's two different ones. And what I was getting at there is, so many times I see people with the results of it, but how did they get it? And I watch people go around the tree and go around the tree and go around the tree, but it's something that when we really look at the liens of the tree, that should be in regard to our placement. Some people call it the lay of the tree, drop zone, whatever you want to call it. I call it target. Is you need to take leans to that position. So we discuss about side leans and forward to back leans to be able to do that. And so that's the second step of the planning process. And then the third step is your escape route. We always look at that third, because once you know what the leans are, then you start to figure out, where am I going to go once this tree starts to move? And that's to get out of there, not only to get away from that tree that you're cutting, but also adjacent trees. A lot of struck bys happen because of intertwined limbs, and people don't really think about it. The whole concept of directional felling, whether it be a tree or a limb on a horizontal tree, is thinking through the process that you want to try to direct that away from any obstructions, any hazards. And so when you're looking for those hazard steps to begin with, you're looking for those intertwined limbs. You're looking for trees out front that could hang up. Maybe even height measure could help you to be able to make sure you have clearance to make it to that next tree out there. And so those are all things as we think about our escape route, as to where do we go once that tree starts to move. And so that's number three. Number four then is really your friend. That's the hinge and the notch. And those two things are what maintains the control and the steering of the tree. that gives you the ability to take and place that tree with your information where you want it to go. And hinge is just simply a strip of wood across attaching the trunk to the stump or a stem to the trunk. And so those are the means of, just like a hinge on a door, keeping it attached till it gets to the latch. And so a lot of rhyming there going on. But anyway, it's something where when you start to think through that, a lot of people think, oh, I got to take that off. But if it's set up properly, you don't have to take it off. You can leave it to be able to steer that tree or that limb to where you want it to go. And no pulled fiber, no splitting, no tearing. And so that's also gives you the opportunity to put yourself in position away from any struck by situations. So that's what we try to look at. And then number 5 is the back cut. And the back cut is one way it sets up your hinge, but it also releases the tree. Sometimes we use a back cut all the way from the back up to the hinge, and that could be on a tree with not a lot of forward lean, or it could be a back leaning tree that we need to get a wedge or some kind of equipment or rigging into it to move it forward direction. And then it could also be a forward leaning tree that we know is going to go when we can't outcut it. And it gives us the ability to set up a bore cut or a plunge cut to be able to release that tree. The two keys there is if I can't cut from the back, I probably want to think about a bore cut, because I don't want the tree to move until I'm ready for it to. I want to have my hinge established. If I have too thick of a hinge, I can end up with what they call a barber's chair or splitting or pulled fiber that causes loss, or it could be danger in a butt rebound or split. So it's something where when we start to look at that, that's what the understanding of, we have to get a hinge that's bendable, and we have to get it down to a dimension. And so we try to use about 10% of the diameter of the wood in width of the hinge, and we try to get enough length to be able to support any side weight. And that we usually think about a rule of thumb about 80% of the dimension, the diameter. And so those kind of things we look at in the training process. And then that back cut, whether released or cutting from the back, gives us the ability to decide when that tree is going to go and get out of there to our escape route, which really usually runs about 45 degrees away from the direction of fall. So that's kind of the process. I think maybe I'll set up and show you this little one on reactive forces. A lot of people are not aware that there's 3 of them. Of the situations that I've heard about where some well, it should be working. Oh, nothing yet. situations that I've heard about where someone was cut with a chainsaw, I could usually look and attribute it back to possible situation of dull saw chain. But probably 90% of the people that I ask in classes and around about issues that they were cut with a chainsaw, 90% of them say it was because it kicked back at me. And rightfully so. I mean, it could be. But you know, many times I think the chainsaw gets a bad rap about reactive forces when it has a lot to do with the actual control of the chainsaw. I usually say that it's not as much the reactive forces of the saw as it is our reaction to its action. And that sounds complicated. But if you start to cut into a limb or into a log with the chainsaw, and all of a sudden, it starts to bind your saw, the first thing you think about is get it out. You want to pull it back out of that situation as quickly as possible. And oftentimes the operator isn't in a good standing position, or they don't have good footing. And next thing you know, somebody sits back with a chainsaw, or you start to stumble and the chainsaw goes into a body part. But it can be kickback. There are 3 reactions actually that are listed, and it's important. If you go to your operator's manual, it's always listed about the upper corner of the bar tip, the kickback corner. But there are 2 other reactive forces that I want to discuss with you also. So that's kind of where we're at on this particular one. First one is, let's take for instance that you have to cut with the top of the bar. And so many times people say, well, we don't like to use the top of the bar. Oh, why not? Well, they just tell us that it's dangerous. Well, the top of the bar, if you're working especially with storm damage situations, is almost a must. Because you're going to have situations to where wood is up against a tree or across a ditch, and if you start cutting on the top with the bottom of the bar, you're going to end up pinched. So you must be able to use the top of the bar to undercut that situation to release the pressures and the weights. So let's take a look at what happens here. First of all, the chain is going around, they say, at about 55, 56 miles an hour. When it comes up into the material that you're cutting, basically it tries to force the chainsaw back towards the operator. And this particular one we call pushback. And it can be pretty violent with the larger saws, there's no doubt, because if you don't have a good stance, it can knock you off balance. But more or less, a couple issues there to think about. Your stance needs to be such that you're able to hold the chainsaw to undercut, and you can maybe keep against your thigh or lock your arms to be able to keep that saw from pushing back past you. And that's really what you're trying to manage in that particular control situation. So pushback can also happen in a couple different angles. If you think about it here, if I start to cut here, it's pretty much a level or horizontal movement. If I come up at this, it's going to push up and backwards towards the operator. If I was to come underneath a limb or a log like this, it's going to push down and back. So you have to think about those 3 maneuvers to be able to manage the situation with the bar and chain pressures. So that's pushback. And so stance should be such that your feet are apart, that they're about shoulder width. You're balancing your weight before you start to address the wood with the upper part of the bar. And that gives you a good firm stance to work with. Next is you want to think about that high RPM is important. If you start to look at the chain itself as it goes around the bar, there are gaps or spaces between the teeth. When you slow down the RPM, you end up with it starting to grab, starting to vibrate. Another issue with a lot of gasoline-powered chainsaws anyway, they're centrifugally clutch driven. So we'll look at that in the maintenance section, but more or less the centrifugal clutch has shoes that grab the inside of a drum. If you slow down the RPM, those start to slip, and that can also cause surges. So you want to make sure that you think about that. And then one very important one too is the grip on the handles. You know, I have many people say, I'm more comfortable with my thumb up here on top. But when you start to look at it, you really don't have a grip, especially in a pushback situation. So it's important that you circle the handles with your thumb. And I haven't had many people tell me that this one up here is a better grip. They just say it's more comfortable. You have a lot more control and power over the grip with your thumbs encircling the handles. So that's an important one to think about with the grips. So that's the reactive force of pushback. Now, how about down here on the bottom? Normal cutting position. So now the chain's spinning around. When you go into the material, it starts to pull the chainsaw away from the operator. That one we call pull in. And in that case, more or less, it tries to take the chainsaw away from the operator forward. And so we have to think about our stance, our RPM, and our grips again. In this case, you know, you've got the situation, if it is a horizontal movement again, it tries to pull away flat. But if you're over like this, it tries to pull down. If you are going up against like this with a power hit, it tries to pull up and forward. So we have to consider how do we keep it from going forward. We talked about that, you know, with a pushback, we could actually come against our thigh or lock the arms. And I guess really on the pull-in situation, you could extend your arms and hold back on the chainsaw, but most people will go up against the bucking spikes on the chainsaw bar, and that keeps the power head up against your working material, and it can't go forward from there. RPM-wise, basically the same, wide open. You know, they really don't make a situation to where chain spinning slower is going to be smoother. So wide open is really the only setting on the chainsaw other than idle. And I feather up and down between the two all the time, and you will too. But you have to think about in the cutting position there, or when you start your cut, the chain should be wide open. The RPM should be wide open to spin that chain as fast as possible. So that you want to make sure that you consider wide open. And then the grip again, making sure that you're all the way around that handlebar with your thumbs. Same situation there. But that's the pull in. Now, with both of those two, it puts you closer to the material that you're cutting. And I want to share with you a little story from several years ago. I was doing a show in South Georgia, and I was doing a little safety talk. And after I did that on reactive forces, I had a fellow come up there and he said, what you were talking about out there got me. And I was filling up my chainsaw fuel tank, and I turned around and he had a scar going across his face. It had happened about 3 years before. And it had healed up, but it was still very noticeable. And I said, kick back? He said, yes, sir. It got me very, very quickly. And I said, do you mind if I ask you what happened? And he said, well, I got home from work. I'm a farmer, and got home from the fields that afternoon, and I had a pecan tree. A windstorm had come across, and a pecan tree had gone over in my backyard. So it was wind thrown, and it went over like this, and the limbs were pretty long on it, as they do pecan trees, trying to get more nuts, as I say. And he said, I didn't have a chainsaw, but my brother does. So I called him up and I went over and borrowed his saw. I said, it was a big saw? He said, well, it was a 20-inch bar. I said, well, how big was the limb that you were cutting off of the tree when it kicked? He said, well, it's probably about 10, 12 inches. And I said, so you had plenty of bar? He said, oh yeah, oh yeah. And you know, he said, I knew I was supposed to not cut above my shoulder. So I went out to where the limb was low enough, and I put the saw all the way against the spikes, and I started to cut down. And when I got through that limb, wham, it just kicked right back into my face. And I asked him, I said, was there anything on the other side of the limb? He said, no, it was just air. And I got to thinking, was that really kickback? And so I started to look through really where kickback occurs. Kickback only occurs in the upper corner of the bar tip. You see, that's where kickback action takes place. Now, you can see here different size bar tips are going to be different lengths of area there. Older times bow saws, which you might have a 10 to 12 inch kickback zone of the bar tip. What happens if you touch here or it's pinched here, it basically, instead of pushing back or going forward, this one rotates. And when it rotates, whatever position it's in, that's where it's going to kick towards. So you have to think about maximizing your distance from that, and also recognizing anytime I touch it or I pull back and it pinches there, there's a good chance that you're going to get a kickback rotation. So as we start to think through it here, since he was over that limb and his bar tip was really in the air, as he cut through the material, he might have pulled back and could have possibly caught the tip. But the way he described it and the way he remembered it is that when he just cut down through it, saw up against the limb, it basically kicked back on him and he ended up on the ground with a bar cut across his face. And you know, I got to thinking, what really happened? And I think it goes back to what I said about our reaction to its action. Think about this tree was over. It could have done a couple things. With a root ball tree, and we'll discuss later, is oftentimes they stand back up when you cut material off of it because the root system will lift the weight trying to stand back to its original position. Another thing is when you have long limb spires coming off of the trunk, if you go out here far enough and that tree was used to standing upright, now it's down here, you have a compression of those limbs. When you take weight off of it, it could come up. How much it came up, I don't know. And I don't think he does either. But it's something to where a little bit of a reaction when you're that close in that position, you could end up overreacting very quickly thinking, oh, it's coming at me to get me. And when you pull back and you don't have good stance or you fall backwards, now our natural reaction in most cases, and I've talked to people, many that have been cut, is that the first thing you do is you grip the handles. And when you grip the handles and the throttle trigger is there, things start to go wide open, and that even makes it worse. So all of those things we have to think through when it comes to reactive forces. It is possible in his case, as in anybody's case, that chainsaw could rotate very fast and hit a body part. So we have to consider the pushback, the pull in, and the kickback. And so we need to really kind of look at the stance and how that works, and we'll go from there as far as reactive forces. Hey, I hope y'all enjoyed that. It is something to think about as we look at some of the different situations where people lose control of saws. And so as you think about, everybody hears about kickback, which is a rotational that happens there on the tip of the bar, but a lot of times lost control and people lose balance and those kinds of things because of the situation of push and pull. So important to kind of consider that. All right, one message here. King, maybe you want to log in. It should be in the chat there if you want to log in on the Zoom call. But he said, "You've got my scar across my knee. 660 got me. Wasn't kickback for me. I was trying to get away because a coworker started pushing." Coworker started pushing on the tree I was cutting for whatever reason. I've heard that before. And working in the city of Charlotte. So it says those tensions and compression situations are what's most scary to me. I'm always sure that nothing I'm cutting on is going to want to take off in another direction. Yeah, you walk up there to something that's horizontal. It's important to think about when you start to cut. First of all, you're looking around to see if anything can come over at you. But as you start to cut, you're trying to figure out, is it going to go side to side? Is it going to go away from me? Is it going to go towards me? Is it going to come up? Is it going to go down? And then the one that catches me most of the time where you really get stuck is back pressure because, you know, it could have the top or the limb up against something. Ends up you start to cut. And especially if you've got, you know, wood, the fiber that's starting to rot and stuff, dead tree, it can push back on you very quickly. And now you're stuck in that situation. So it's always a good idea to step back and try to come up with where those movements are going to take place because that's the part you're trying to plan against. So very, very important. But I've got the I've got the Zoom up. If you want to come on, we'll record or maybe pass that along to somebody else because you know what we can share out there, and this is what I'm calling this the here to there project. Is that trying to get information from here to there to everybody's head because there's so many injuries that take place out there, especially in storm cleanup. And so important to think through that the more information we can pass along, the the more likely it is that we're going to be able to keep other incidents from taking place out there. And I just put the link up. I don't know if you can copy it, and you can come in it on your cell phone or on a computer, whichever you've got, and we can chat about it and kind of hear it in your own words there. It's nice to read it on the chat, but it's great to hear it. So well, that's cool. Yeah, I understand. You got to eat. So let's see. I'm just watching while I eat. Really get a lot of good info from your videos. I could be half as smart as you when I'm your age. I'll be doing something. Yeah, I'm a 68. So it adds up with you. You get to see a lot of a lot of things and meet a lot of people out there. That's for sure. So where are you located, King? It's hard to tell from all the handles, on YouTube and Facebook, and trying to figure out who people are. I probably know who you are, but I don't recognize the handle there. So let me know where you're from. Yeah, I had one of the 2-hour courses I did last week. A gentleman from up in Virginia. He he had decided to get him a chainsaw, and he started work I think last year, and then this year or end of last year he ended up putting the saw in his knee, and so it's very very hard to think about an unplanned event as something that we don't expect to happen. So it's important that chaps or pants are on there as our form of defense. Our first form of defense should be our planning process, but secondly, and really the cheapest insurance is making sure that we have leg protection on and good heavy duty boots, hard hats. And there's a lot of things where people don't think about. And I see people online all the time, working without a hard hat on. And let me see if I can find this thing. And I've got a really neat little video that I had put together with David Breeden. I can find it. Let's see here. Yeah, this is it. Let you take a look at this. This was David Breeden, who is Husqvarna rep and also helps out with some of the training. And he's a very good instructor, very good chainsaw operator. But this happened to him not long ago. Let's see if I've got. Struck bys and chainsaw operations. They're not new. They've been the #1 injury and fatality cause with the chainsaw operators as long as I've been in this business. That the case anyway since the late 1970s. Typical is that a tree brushes another tree top during its falling to the ground, or a hanging limb detaches as the angle of the tree falling changes and the limb or top section plummets to the ground in the area the operator was standing. A climber or bucket operator cuts a limb that lodges in another or flips back towards the operator. A broken top is leaning up against a limb or tree being cut, unrecognized in the plan, and the operator is struck. Most of these incidents are impacts to the head or upper body, causing serious head injury or fatality, and some are even crushing. They impact the operator, but also the families and co-workers of these unplanned events. #1 injury and death cause to logging on ground workers. #1 according to TCIA in the tree care and arboriculture industries. Even in firewood, storm cleanup, and lawn and landscape, struck bys make up a majority of the incidents. In my opinion, many of the cuts and lacerations people tell about in chainsaw incidents were caused by limbs, logs, or trees twisting, and the chainsaw was pushed or pulled into an operator body part. Incomplete planning, insufficient tree or limb control, limited or no escape route utilized, an incorrect choice of cutting techniques and saw maintenance contributes to these struck by accidents. Improper use of pole saws or pole pruners can result in struck by incidents and electrocutions from trees and limbs striking power lines. Establish proper communication between arborists working above and those working below. It's one of the most effective ways to prevent struck by injuries. Calling stand clear when dropping limbs and all clear once the tree is safe. Establishing communication is really the key. The type of communication strategy that will be used should be defined before work has begun so that all parties involved know what to look or listen for. When chainsaws or other power tools are carried aloft, secure them. That's the key. Pole pruners and pole saws need to be secured when they are hung to avoid dislodgement. The drop zone is the area where the tree section will land during pruning. Establishing where this drop zone will be and making sure that your fellow crew members know where it is can help avoid many injuries from struck bys. A widowmaker doesn't have to be a dead hanger. Can be green limbs that hit and break out because of felling direction or limbs brushing. Barber chairs or splitting trunk or limbs are a major cause of struck bys. I've come across some interesting stories of struck bys over the years, but one recently is from a very competent chainsaw trainer, certified arborist, and Husqvarna representative, David Breeden. David and his family are from Kingston, Georgia. He and his wife recently became grandparents, which makes it even more important to do their work safely. Listen to David's story and to others, and some of the best ways to eliminate these life changers.
This is technically the second largest white oak in the state of Georgia, and it's about 10 feet DBH. A few months ago, I was at visiting some guys doing some tree work in Winder. They had a tree that they wanted to take down, so while I was there, I thought that I would fell the tree for them. Nothing super technical. It was just about a 20-inch DBH tree. We put a rope in it. There were some obstacles around. It was in between two houses. There was some power lines. It wasn't a no-brainer, but nothing serious. What we didn't see when we were building our plan and doing our inspection on the tree was that they had cut a limb the day before from a hardwood tree, and it was resting up on a limb in this tree that we were cutting. About 6-inch diameter, probably 20 foot long. Like I said, out of a hardwood, pretty heavy limb. We had a rope in the tree, pulling it with a mini skid steer just to get the tree down once the tree was cut. I made my notch. I set up my hinge, put a wedge in just in case we had an issue with the rope broke or something like that. I made my back cut, released the tree, and got what I feel is 15 to 20 foot away in the escape route, but nevertheless this branch came down and hit me in the side of the head. You can kind of see the scar on my helmet there. Slid down my helmet, hit me in the shoulder, and immediately the left side of my body went numb. I thought I had a serious shoulder injury, and I was injured, but the biggest thing was a head and neck injury, and which caused the numbness on the left side of my body. My neck is still, after several months, my neck is still sore when I turn it to the side. PPE works, and these helmet systems are very valuable when you're like we are right now underneath tree canopies, because trees, if no one's pruning them, they prune themselves. It doesn't have to be a limb that was cut. It could be limbs that fall, so you certainly need to protect your head. They're not the most frequent of accidents, but they can certainly be the most costly.
Yeah. As you can see there's a lot of potential for any of us. It doesn't make any difference how much experience you have. If that unplanned event happens, it's going to affect your life. There's no doubt about it. So important process to make sure that we understand and plan what we can. That's for sure. And we have Lee Dawkins. Is that right? Can you hear me? Should be on. Can you hear me, Lee? Well, should be on there. Are you muted? I don't see. Looks like you dropped off. So anyway, Lee had a question. Maybe be back on. He said, "Thank you for sharing your vast experience and know-how. You're too kind. Just curious, what is your favorite species and size tree to cut? And what is your favorite saw bar and chain setup? 1,000 thanks. Best to you and yours." As far as trees, I'd much rather deal with the hardwoods than softwoods, but probably cut a lot more pine, southern pine, and a lot of the trainings that we do in the southeast. But up through New England and Pennsylvania, on up in Ohio, there's a lot of white pine that we sometimes come across, especially New England. But the majority of what we're cutting is usually hardwoods in the training, because it's usually dead stuff, and we're trying to get it out for whoever the organizer is, and save some growing trees out of it. We're kind of doing some cleanup work. But I'm going to say I really enjoy poplar trees. They're tall. It's a softer hardwood, but it has a pretty strong fiber, and it's fun to try to put those exactly where you want them to go, and it is pretty possible. But I cut a lot of hickory and red oak, white oak, also in the trainings. But as far as sawbar, I've for years, in traveling, there's not much that I can't take down on the eastern U.S. anyway. Going out, to Oregon and Washington State, there's maybe a need for a little bit larger sawbar, but even at that, I can do two times the diameter very easily with a 20-inch bar. So, 40-inch tree, 38 to 40-inch tree. And really, you can take three times the bar length with a bore cut and be able to work with it. And Soren always used to say, the majority of your work is going to be the limbing and the bucking the top. So that's, as far as storm cleanup and stuff. So a big saw there just becomes a lot of weight. But, felling the tree can be done very quickly with a 20-inch bar, some pretty good sized diameters. So I usually carry a 20 or 24 inch. I really don't even own anything bigger than that. But if I go out to larger tree areas, sometimes we work in 32, that kind of thing. It's a pretty good length for me to concentrate on. But the saws that I use are generally between 60 and 65 cc, so about a 3.7 to 4 cubic inch is generally the size. I've had three or four Husqvarna 562s. I used to run the 372s, but for several years now, the 562s since those came out. And then I do have a couple of steels. I've got one with the M-Tronic and the 362, and then also an adjustable 362. And I've had about three of those with also with the rear handle quick stop chain brake. I used those in training for a while, and I keep both because some of the cities and towns I work with and state is using steels, and then some of them are using Husqvarna. And so I've always been one to think about letting them use and practice with what they're going to be running. But it really doesn't make any difference if you look at the basics. They all pretty much operate the same, a little bit different controls, but they all do a good job. And when you stay with the major brands, the majority of issues that you have, I've found over the years anyway, has to do with upkeep and keeping a good sharp chain and those kinds of things. And so I don't run across too many bad saws. So that's kind of the process for me anyway. Yeah, I still don't. I hear you, and I don't see you back on the Zoom there, Lee. I don't know. It dropped off for some reason. I saw a picture of a fine-looking young man on there a few minutes ago. There he is again. But I still don't have any sound. I don't show anything muted on that. It shows you as unmuted. It might be something on my end here. Let me see. Say something there now, Lee. Hello. Well, gremlins have struck. I don't see any issues. put you on the speaker even. It doesn't come through. So I don't know. Got something. Are you on the phone? I don't know. Hopefully I'm still getting out. Try to unmute there again, Lee. I'm still showing you muted. Anyway, it's not coming through. But hopefully you heard my answer to your quote here. Okay, you got another written one here. So it says, thanks Tim, great answer. Have dropped several 30, 40-inch tulip poplars. Yes, that's what we had down here north of Richmond with a 440 Husqvarna 18-inch bar. Have upgraded to a 550 XP Mark II. Wow, that's a good one. And it is fast, isn't it? High RPM. Cutting Atlantis on Rappahannock River lately. Won't be able to chat or video. Thank you, Miss Dart. Okay. Are you do you work with the city of Richmond? Were you part of some of the training up there with the city last year or this year? I was up there a couple times with the training, and then this year, Chris Childs went up and worked just a few weeks ago with the city Parks Department there at James River area. To want him to type through there, but hopefully, hopefully this thing is set up. I don't know why it was having trouble there on the audio. Just doing some cutting for a friend with a river property on the Rappahannock. Ridding the invasive Atlantis tree of heaven. Yeah. That's food for the lantern fly. That's what I understand. I think, if that's correct. And I was reading an article the other day that the lanternfly has taken off. I remember about, it's probably been 4 years, maybe 5 years ago. I was doing some training up in Pennsylvania with the Corps of Engineers, and they had all the trees of heaven kind of mapped out and had traps for the lanternfly. And evidently they are hatching out big time this year. But haven't quite seen a lot of damage like a gypsy moth or that kind of stuff. But evidently they do some real damage to the tree in the springtime of the year. Put that message back up there. when you do check in on the link, you have to make sure that you select the audio. As you're logging in. It should be picking up there. But I see you still connected. Lee, can you still hear me? But I gave the answer on the tree of heaven and the lantern fly. Did it come through on the audio from me?
Anybody home?
Who's there? Who's there?
Lee here.
Oh, you finally got sound. What happened?
Oh, I got away from the noisy environment I was in, so
Oh, so it was shutting off with you. Huh? Who's that young
but
one standing on the stump there? Looks like, oh, he's on a swing, I guess it is.
yeah, that's my son.
Ah, so you're up around Richmond? Do you do
Yes,
you,
sir.
so you're just cutting some firewood and cleaning some stuff up with friends, huh? Doing
Yeah.
some property, I guess you'd say eradication, or how would you say they eradicate? Just got it.
Yeah, just getting rid of the invasives that'll just keep taking over.
Have you seen the lanternfly on those? This anytime?
I've never seen that. That's that new little Japanese beetle looking thing?
Yeah, it's got weird looking wings on it. It's kind of greenish colored thing, I think. Best I remember. I've up in Pennsylvania 3 or 4 years ago. There was like 1,000 of them on this one ailanthus tree, and they had traps around trying to catch them and stuff. And then I saw an article just a few weeks ago there about they seem to be thinking it's going to be a big year for them. I don't know. But I haven't really noticed them. You know, like gypsy moth and stuff. You could kind of walk around and stuff's dropping on your head all the time. You know, but I haven't really seen much that damage wise these. But evidently, it kills trees, defoliates or whatever.
Yeah, they say it's around Washington D.C. Maybe that's probably 100 miles north of where we are, but yeah, I guess it's here.
Uh, well, tell us a little bit. Where did you get your training? You dropped you look at some pretty good sized poplar trees, like 18 inch. How did you do that? And what gave
Oh,
you the information?
well, really, we bought a a house and a property, and it had a bunch of sort of you know a mix of hardwoods, poplars, oak, pines, and they were all struggling to get sunlight, so they're all sort of deformed and stuff.
Hmm.
And we get tropical storms that come through, and there was tons of branches to pick up when you didn't necessarily have time or inclination to pick them up. So I thought, the heck with this, I'm just going to drop all these things. So I just bought a saw and watched all the Husqvarna felling videos I could find, and anybody who seemed to know anything about how to drop a tree, and started started dropping trees.
Hmm. Did you watch the one with Carrie Shepherd? That was it's about I guess 45 minutes long or whatever. He's cutting down a tree.
The
It's a lot of
Husqvarna man.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he teaches you how to size it up and estimate the height and how
Uh-huh.
to set up your hinge.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Carrie
yeah.
would
Without that, I would have probably got wiped out.
so video was kind of your learning system.
Yeah, as far as felling,
Uh-huh.
I had bucked up stuff when I was younger, and my dad always ran a saw. But as far as dropping any 24 to 30-inch or greater, sometimes 40-inch trees, uh, yeah, I'd never done that.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, felling is something that's really kind of systematic. Um, if you've got a good planning process, and as long as you take that plan and you figure out a spot wide enough and long enough so it's not going to hit something else or hang up or throw limbs or whatever, getting it down in the position you want is pretty easy and very accurate to do as long as the tree's in decent shape. But then when it gets horizontal, that seems to be where me and everybody else, has issues in certain situations with storm stuff. And I've been spending a lot of time with the training on that here over the past few years, and it's hard to teach people that. And I have steps that I go through in the training, and then I watch and until people really practice it and kind of see how it works. They go out and end up getting stuck real quick.
Yeah,
I have people say, you look at it, is it going to go up or go down right there? And then they say, well, I think it's going to go down right there. And then they go up and they start backwards and get stuck. So you have to stick with your plan.
yeah, really keep an eye on what's going on. Uh, See how what you're cutting through is moving, if you're getting pinched or it's opening up.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's the compression and tension you talked about there. It's the curve opens up if it's tension side, so it goes away from your bar and chain. But then if you get on the opposite side, that compression side, sometimes you don't have to cut very far, and you get stuck real quick.
mm-hmm.
So it's quite interesting. Quite interesting. Yeah,
So you got to learn from the master, that Soren.
yeah, I worked with Soren, and we had Game of Logging incorporated together, and for about I guess probably 6 7 years, we traveled pretty extensive together. And yeah, he was an amazing teacher, be able to communicate with just about anybody from firewood cutter to the most high volume logging situations around the country. And so I learned a lot, both sides of teaching and cutting too, from him. And he had a lot of saw knowledge too. But I was able to kind of tag along on that, and I started putting the RDT system in with this game of logging, and then we formed the company together for promotion to get the competitions going around the country. And we had a lot of folks going through it. And over in the mountainous areas of Virginia, with the Duffield and Big Stone Gap and Wise, up through that area quite a lot. And then um, we did one up above um, Richmond. I'm trying to think. No, it's just below Richmond, but it was just one special one we did with the logging show there in Richmond one year.
But you know quite a bit about the saw engine, don't you? You were a mechanic when you were
Yeah,
younger.
that's how I started out. I was service manager, and then I traveled all over the country for Steel and Husqvarna doing the technical training with dealers and distributors.
What do you recommend to break in get the rings and the cylinder seated? What do you recommend as far as procedure or mix ratio and that sort of stuff?
Well, I generally I just basically mix to whatever is recommended, 40 to 50 to 1. Um, and during the break-in period, I strongly recommend that you use the oils that the manufacturer specifies. And after that, you can, change if you want to, but at least during the first startup procedures and stuff, if there are things of warranty that might come through, it's a good idea to because they test their equipment with their oil. They really don't test it with anybody else's. And so good grade of gasolines, high octane as you can get with as little or no ethanol. And back in my day, it was MTBE that caused a lot of the issues. And so that was an ether that they used for oxygenation instead of the ethanol. But as long as you even with ethanol, if you mix it at the ratios with their oil, and then basically I set it up to the flutter, the engine. And when I say flutter, that's the four stroking, and it
Mm-hmm.
just levels out just where you have that flutter still there. Don't go above it. And that's generally going to be right at the no load specified RPM in the specs. So that let's say my 562, if I was to tack it right now, is probably turning about 13.6, and that's where that auto tune system holds it also. But on the adjustable ones, that's what I do. I'd go in past that flutter, back up just to the edge of it, and you want the flutter in it. Don't take it out, because that's where you've got maximum power and lubrication and air and cooling.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I do, and then just run it. Keep the air filter clean. That's one of the biggest things that people don't realize is how a air filter affects the chainsaw and trimmers too. But when you start thinking about you've got a 50 cc or a 60 cc, whatever, and every time that piston goes up, it's pulling air in the filter. It goes through the carburetor where it's sprayed with fuel, and then it goes to the crankcase for lubrication. And so, if you think about it, every time that piston goes up, it's going to draw that 50 cc's or whatever. And if you've got an air filter that's clogging, even with the auto tunes and stuff like that, if you've got air filter that's clogging, it starts to richen up your mixture. And so then, you start to look at running rich, and yeah, that's great lubrication, but it also starts to cause heat, and it can cause carbon to build up also, because you want it to burn as cleanly as possible. And two cycles are not very clean burning. And so the next thing is when that piston goes down, it pushes that mixture up to the combustion area, and then the next one up, then it explodes it, and it sucks it out through another port through the exhaust. And so then it starts automatic. But if you had a filter that's halfway blocked, then it starts to affect. And what people generally do is they start leaning stuff out, trying to get it working. Well, that changes the lubrication side of it. And so that's it. It has to be set up to how it's specified. Now, you got a lot of guys out that do a lot of, modifications and stuff. And if you modify the intake and you modify the exhaust and you change the compression ratios a little bit, that changes the characteristics of the engine. And if you're good at it, you can make a 50 cc saw cut like a 60. But if you want it to be as it was designed in that design with cooling and longevity, then you need to make sure that air filter's clean. You got good clean gasoline, the highest octane, and mix it up with good oil, and and just run it at that flutter sound. And a
Yeah,
lot of
this.
people, they're disgusted with the auto tunes and the M-tronics and stuff like that, but that was a necessity that the industry had to go to be able to meet the federal requirements of EPA. And so when you have an adjustable carburetor, it doesn't vary for elevation, temperature, fuels, and air, and all this kind of stuff, whereas this auto tune does. And then you really start to think too that if you've got a dirty filter there, what's the auto tune starting to do? And that's something where a lot of people sold it as, you don't have to clean the filter as much, it'll run. But if you
Mm,
don't clean the filter, then that automatic starts leaning it out. It has to take away fuel to keep the RPM up. Then what happens? Now you got lack of lubrication. And so detonation starts, heat starts, transfers, and then you end up with the piston expanding more than the cylinder, and that's what causes the issues, you know.
mm-hmm. There's a lot of intake wear with the dirty if you got debris coming in, right?
Yeah, yeah. And in a lot of cases, I used to see, a lot of the modifications where guys would go to specialty filters, which still after Mount St. Helens, I was involved with Roger Simons, really doing a lot of testing out in the West Coast with the volcanic dust, trying to keep it from eating up saws. It would polish it like polished chrome on the inside and wear out bearings and stuff. And so we worked with K&N to be able to basically design what steel still uses as their HD filter today. And that stopped a lot of it. But then you'd have guys using what they call a green weenie and that kind of thing. It was a
Oh
foam
yeah.
element or a pre-filter around that was foam, and you leave it in the back of the truck and gets a little moisture. And for the first little bit
Ooh.
that you're running it, that really takes the intake side out. It'll clean out carbon on the exhaust side, but it'll it'll scratch up some intakes pretty fast.
Yeah, this little 550, I have 20 hours in it. I just probably ran a couple of the Husqvarna premix, a couple gallons of that Husqvarna premix through it.
Uh-huh.
It runs like it just screams. But I have a digital tachometer, and I did sort of that put your tip in a long log and sort of rip just
Uh-huh.
to sort of set the high end. And as far as my tachometer reads, it said it's 13,000 RPM, and it doesn't bobble at the top like at four stroke.
Mm-hmm.
It just it just screams, but I trust that it's right, I guess.
Yeah, that saw I think goes like 14.7 or up to as much as 15.3. I think it's 14.7. And it's a saw that's made for high speed delimbing, and they use it for that in Europe. A lot of arborists use it, in the United States and North America. It's very high RPM, but it's built to take that. But yeah, it's going to sound a little lean when you get up, past about 13,000 RPM on a chainsaw, because that piston's going up and down so fast it doesn't have time to look. But it will hold together. Those saws they're bulletproof. I mean, a lot of people running them. They love it because it's a powerful saw with very high RPM, and it almost takes cutting past the ability of the chain to throw a chip though. It almost skates chain on some species, but yeah, it's a fast cutter, very smooth. But
Yeah.
it'll still have that flutter up there if it
Do- if you really dog it in or bog it down or something.
yeah, you'll see it if you apply a little bit, it'll level out. But just keep good fresh fuel and keep it mixed about 50 to 1, and you'll have it.
So what's the uh, if you look in your cylinder and you see you have a buildup on a piston of carbon,
Hmm.
what do you usually do? Do you just take the top end off and clean the piston rings and cylinder, or
When you say carbon, is it soft gunky stuff or is it actual carbon?
no, it looks like it's dried up hard brown carbon.
Hmm. Most of that will, if it's built up too much for some reason, you maybe have a exhaust system that's starting to plug, or you're running it way too rich. That might build it up. But most, if it's kind of a brownish gray color, it'll generally fleek off and go out the exhaust. That's what the exhaust screen's for, is to stop those from sparking outside the muffler. But as long as you're getting that tan to grayish color there shouldn't be any issues. Now, if it's building big black carbon, you've got just too rich of a mixture, too much oil, too much fuel.
it doesn't it typically flows out the exhaust port. It won't flake off and find its way between the ring or cylinder or anything.
It's designed. You're gonna have in a two-stroke engine. You're gonna have some carbon that builds. What you want to try to do is keep it away from the crankcase. That's for sure. But that's where most of the bearing problems and stuff like that happen, is in the lower end with carbon buildup if it's running too rich. But carbon, as long as you've got it, good fuel, good oil, and you're running there about that flutter, you're not going to have carbon that can score. That's not, in my book. That's not the issue. It's when you start getting too rich, bad fuels, old fuels, and you start seeing a big black carbon buildup. That's where you'll start to pick up stuff. that's crystallized and hard,
Hmm.
But most of it, if you're running correct, you pull your plug out and you look at top of the piston and you're getting a light gray, brownish color. I mean, yeah, you're good to go.
Thank you, sir.
But so many people talk about break-ins, and I always tell people if you go to one of the factories and you watch the assembly line where it comes off, they put a fuel in there, which is basically what you'd have as a motor mix or Husqvarna gas or whatever. It's what they call an alkaloid or whatever type of a fuel that they put it in on the line. And the first thing it does when that rope comes up, it goes wide open. So, you know, when
Try to
when
get it try to get peak torque and push those rings against the cylinder.
I mean that's how it works. I mean, when you start slowing down a two-cycle engine, check the temperature. It's going up. Just like if you get on a big hill with a diesel truck, it starts slowing down. Your temperature doesn't go down, does it? It goes up.
No.
And that's the same thing when you take a two-stroke and you start slowing it down, the temperature goes up. And so you load the chain too much, or you start riching it up too much, or you apply too much pressure. That's where temperatures start to go up. And that saw is designed with so much airflow at the RPM specifications that they've designed it to. So if it's designed to run at 13.5, 13.6, that's the coolest spot for that engine to run, where you're getting airflow. That's like a lot of times, people will say, "Well, I'm going to set it down here and let it cool off. I've been out there running it." Well, if it was adjusted correctly to begin with, when you're taking that big tree down, when you set it down and let it idle, it's going hot too. So you're better off to get it to dissipate the heat from the inside to the outside than to keep blowing the hot air over it. But that's theory by Ard. That's that's something that everybody's got their own opinions about it. But if you take a perometer, which they're pretty really available now at parts stores and all kind of stuff, the digital thermometer,
Uh-huh.
and just play with some temperatures at the exhaust. I mean, it's amazing what'll happen. And that's what you want to try to do, is keep it running as cleanly as possible. But you gotta have it right there at that flutter point. That's where you want it. You don't want it way down below it, and you don't want it above it for sure, because that's taking it past its design parameters in most cases. Unless you've done some modification, you want to keep right there at that.
No. No, I just leave them the way they were engineered. But you want it to flutter at no load RPM, or you want it to flutter in the cut?
Well, you can check it. You can check it either way, but it's a different sound. In other words, if you check it at no load, you go up past it and you come back till it has a good steady flutter, and then when you put it in the wood, it should clean out. You hear
You
it.
don't want to hear any. You don't want to hear that four stroking in the wood.
Well, it'll still kind of be a four stroke, but it just kind of cleans out. You'll hear it just under load. It just kind of evens out.
Yeah, I think I got you. Do you know? There's a guy on YouTube, Donnie Walker. His family's a Walker saw shop in Canada.
Uh-huh.
Heard of those fellas?
Yeah. They got a nice shop. I've
His
seen.
suggestion for break-in, he said, let your saw idle for one full tank of fuel.
Mm-hmm.
And I, I don't know what to think of that. If that's just sort of letting everything get happy, piston, cylinder, or if that's a good idea or what. But
Well, if
I,
if it's not pulling everything through cleanly, it's going to start building carbon in the crankcase and the bearings and on top. But if it's 24 degrees outside, that might be a good idea. So it's up to the temperature. But if it's 90 degrees outside and you let it sit there idling, it's not doing anything except probably building carbon.
like guys like you that know two-stroke engines, I know with the four-stroke engine, a brand new engine with a fresh hone or something, you want to get up to peak torque to make the rings, uh, you know, seat up with the
Mm-hmm.
cylinder.
In the cylinder, yeah.
But with the two-stroke, I'm not sure how the break-in process really works. Whether you can do it at idle or you need cylinder pressure or what.
I think it takes cylinder pressure. There's not really, you've got cylinder materials that are generally, you know, either chrome or it's a nickel sill. And so it's a pretty, some of the chrome cylinders are kind of pretty slick, but the nickel sill and then also the different composite chromes, um, they seat the rings pretty fast. And you don't have, you got steel rings usually, you don't have chrome rings necessarily. It's according to whether you've got a chrome cylinder and steel rings, or whether you've got some people or some manufacturers in certain models will use a hardened nickel on the ring. So, but they're not going to tell you what it is. But that's how they specify for their longevity and try to maximize the operation. But that's it's going to seat if you get out there and run it after a period of time. But most of the time when they come off the line, they're seated.
Hmm.
If you watch it, they're in that little soundproof booth, and that thing runs for 2 or 3 minutes, and then it comes out and it cools down on the assembly line going to the box, and that's it. So, and that
Yeah.
as long as you don't overspeed it or underspeed it, that thing will give you a long, long life. I don't know how many saws. I mean, I used to get for all our competitions and everything, and these are all guys who've gone through our training. We would give away about 52 saws a year from the competitions and stuff, and and over the years in the training, I go through 2 to 3 saws a year for sure, and they're started thousands of times and cut many trees with people and cutting dirt and everything else, and I can't remember but 2 saws that I've ever had an issue with them starting and running, and that was at a show in DuQuoin, Illinois, and both of them were consecutive serial numbers, and the ignition systems both gave out. It was about 100 degrees that day out competition, and both of those saws they popped once, and that was it. But those kind of things, the manufacturer, when you start looking at steel and Husqvarna, they just don't produce junk. I mean,
No.
it's tested. And people don't realize, when people talk about this problem or that problem, if there's an issue, I mean, they hear about it big time. You know, I have people all the time about the fuels and that kind of stuff. If there's usually some outside issue there, and I'm not standing up for the manufacturers. I'm just stating that when you get in the volume of these things that are going out in canned fuels now, and chainsaws and stuff like that, they pretty much know there's an issue, you know. And once it gets up to a certain percentage, then they're going to make some serious change with it. But it's generally when you go from one side of the country to the other side, fuels change. You can go to a gas station in your hometown today and go back there 3 or 4 weeks later, and it'll be completely different fuel because the vendors are moving the fuel from one location to the other as weather's warming up this time of year and stuff. The vapor pressures and those kinds of things start to affect. And that can have a big issue on the cooling and the running of the saw too. That's the reason why you got to understand how it should run, sound wise. And if you're running a lot of saws, a tachometer is not a bad investment, so that you can kind of see when things change. And if you've got operators who are listening for those flutters to leave, or situations of rough idles and those kinds of things, you can stay ahead of a lot of issues. All you got to do is keep the filter clean, and that takes care of it.
Yeah. Well, the Husky, the filters hardly ever. I mean, they stay pretty clean. But that I was so impressed with the Husqvarna. I bought that little 440.
Uh-huh.
It's a 440cc consumer saw in 2018, and I cut hundreds of hours with it. Never had a bit of trouble, you know. it cut trees that were out of its league, only
Mm.
because I watched those videos, Husqvarna felling videos, and learned the proper way to do it. But so impressed with the Husqvarna saw.
I tell you, they're an excellent company, and steel is good too. I've got a lot of friends both places, and you know, it's just something where those two manufacturers have done a lot to promote equipment, training, safety, and so that's something that has you know kept me going for years. And when you start to look at just about their full line of stuff, I mean, yeah, it's amazing. They really don't have a bad one. And if something does show up, they pretty much take care of it pretty fast. But that's the whole thing of trying to get information from here to there is when a lot of times you know people will get a saw or maybe they've got a pretty good sized crew and they've got several people that are operating the saws and you know things start to happen but they don't have the basis to be able to see why it happened. I mean, you know, as I travel around the country and you know, people say, well, this saw's no good, that saw's no good. And I always say that, you know, you really don't want to think about it that way. It's like telling your friend or wife or somebody's ugly, you know. It's something that get in the Ford and Chevrolet ideas. But the thing is that um, I'll never forget this one guy they sent me down to is in South Carolina, and he had bought some I think 056 Mag 2s. He had about six of them he had bought, and he started complaining just a few weeks to his dealer right after he got them that they just wasn't holding up and everything. They had already locked up two of them and stuff, and so they sent me down there. And I got down there and I started going his operation. He had some nice equipment and stuff. And he was, as we were going in the woods, he was telling me about his new service truck, you know, to handle the saws. The guys clean the saws up. We've mixed gas in 5 gallon cans and carried them around back and forth for years. And now we've got this fuel cell. Look at this thing, you know, and he had a nice fuel cell built on the back of the truck and all. And we went out to the woods, started looking at the saws and they were running pretty, pretty lean on lubrication. And so I got to thinking. I said, "Well, you know, you've changed over from fuel to this cell, right?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I think I found your problem." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Where's your big guy at?" I said, "What big guy?" He said, "What big guy?" I said, "The guy that picks that truck up and shakes it." Before he had his fuel that was mixed up in those cans and it going back and forth to the gas station and in the back of the truck it got agitated. But he was making a point, you know,
Hmm.
you don't even hardly drive this one out of the woods most of the time until you get, you know, need the gas and the oil and the grease filled up, you know, because it's taking care of all his equipment. And so I told him, I said, well, you're gonna have to get you a big guy to shake that thing because I guarantee. And we did. We took a white piece of paper and started to check, and you could see where the oil line was in that tank. And
Yeah,
then
that's a good point.
I still see on YouTube. I was watching one just a few weeks ago, to where they had they were mixing up in oil jugs, and some oil jugs may be able to handle the fuel, but the other ones don't. It takes it out, and that plastic will get in your fuel systems and your inlet needles and your diaphragms and your orifices, and that it's not made to handle petroleum fuel. And so, you know, people put it in milk jugs and all kinds of
Hmm.
bottles, all that kinds of stuff. And that I saw around the country
Yikes.
quite a lot. And so, you know, those kinds of things that you see that people are like, oh, I've had 20 of these saws and these are all bad, you know. Well, something changed, you know, and not calling them crazy. It's just that they didn't understand the basics of it, you know. They thought because the oil colors changed that was the issue on those 56s, you know. So everything started to go down, but at the same time, they changed their complete fuel system. A nice truck. And I don't know, I think he
Yeah.
put an aeration system in that thing and he didn't have to pick the truck up, but that was his issue with those going out. And then I had another one not far from there, back of the old 048s. That was one that this guy who was the service manager at Mid Atlantic Steel, him and Mike Preddy and Mr. Stevens, and basically we came up with what we call the Southern Supers, and that was a 048 Super, and we put the Torx, serrated Torx screws into it. We put 404 pitch extended 404 semi-skip chain, call it snaggle tooth, and we'd go out and put those screws in it because everybody's complaining about them falling apart. Well, what it was is they run them lean and they would vibrate a little bit. And so once we put those screws in there and slowed them down, we reorificeed the carburation, and where it had a high speed, it was a fixed jet, and then put that 404 chain on there, full chisel, and I even square ground some of it, and boy, those things would cut like crazy, and guys loved them. And, but it was something where that they changed to the newer design shortly after that. That was one of the intermediate ones, but that's all I'll never forget. We went around to this one crew who was complaining about the buffers. You know, the rubber shocks wouldn't stay on the saw, and he had two new cutters that were really good. He said, you know, and so we were out there talking, and he said, "Come on, I'll show you." And we went over a hill, and all of a sudden I heard one, wow, and it stuck in a big pine tree. And I go over the hill, and he was backing the skidder up there, put the choker through the back handle, and that's how he was pulling it out of stuck situations. And so once he saw that, he realized what happened. And so we spent a little time talking to the guys. But, you know, to take a wedge would save the whole situation, but they didn't have any wedges. But, you know,
Hmm.
you start thinking through those kinds of things that a lot of people, you know, and I do it too. I stand up for a situation until I'm proved different. And that's what they should do with their employees and everything else is think about, you know, those guys are good and they are good, but sometimes they don't have the basics of it either if you haven't gone through it with them. So that's the whole idea, getting it to go from here to there.
They you were talking about 056s. My father used to be a steel dealer in 70s or 80s, something like that, and he sent me or gave me an 056 Super.
Uh-huh.
Thing runs like, you know, runs like mad, still real strong, but what can I do to help keep that saw alive? You know,
Well, you know,
I,
unless
I've
it's
looked
got
at the
about 20,
piston.
unless it's got about 20 years of service on it, it's probably still just ready to crank and go.
Yeah, it hasn't been run a whole lot, you know, but
That's got the old Nikasil cylinder and steel rings probably, and that thing they wear forever. They ingest so much dirt. I had one time. Is it 56 Super? We were in Fairmont, Maryland, not Fairmont, Fairfield, Maryland. Doing a thing for the American Pulpwood Association and doing a little training. And I was doing the maintenance, and Soren was talking to the guys on the cutting. And I had tables set up, and we were going to go through reduced downtime, as I call it, the maintenance system. And started off, one guy standing there had an 056 Super, and he's just standing there. I said, "Well, you know, let's check your filters. What do you got? Are they dirty or whatever?" And he's just standing there. And finally, I walked over to him. I said, "Your filter clean?" He said, "My saw doesn't have a filter." I said, "What?" He said, "My saw doesn't have a filter." I said, "Oh yeah." And I unscrewed the knob on top of it and pulled it off, and it was just, you know, they breathed from the bottom, so the top looked good, you know. Pull the filter off, and it's just packed around the carburetor, and the lower right hand corner of the filter, which at that time they were screen wire with the flocking material woven into it, and the whole right hand lower corner towards the handle was gone. And I pulled it off. I looked at it. I said, "Gosh, a piece of this filter's gone. I wonder where it went." And you'd be surprised after that. I bet I've found three saws at least around the country that I found the screen in the exhaust. I mean, those things eat the screen of the filter all the way through the carburetor throat and into the exhaust. And what would happen is that because of how the top comes down on top, the as you would cut, the chips would they would pack up from the top down, believe it or not. And so then the pulse of the engine, if you take a piece of metal and bend it back and forth, it'll weaken and
Mm-hmm.
it would wear that wire out on that lower section, which it had a kind of a brace in the filter. It would wear that wire out, and that piece would snap out and go through the engine, or you'd find it in the airbox. And I found at least three of them in mufflers after that. But it was kind of like, I don't have a filter. Nobody had showed him or told him to clean the air filter on that saw. And he'd been cutting with the company for a year or so. So
Yeah, when I got the saw, I think the lower left, all the flocking on the filter was gone, but cylinder and piston just had a little bit of scuffing, but nothing crazy.
yeah, I've seen those that ate pretty good sized roller bearing off the wrist pin and just to clean it up a little bit, put a new set of rings on it. She's ready to go. I mean,
Hmm.
that saw is tough, very tough.
See, how come when that saw will get hot, run a couple tanks through it or something, and it just wants to die? Is that ignition coil, or I
Uh,
know there are some screwy ignitions with that.
do you have one of the old ones with points, or is it electronic?
No, it's electronic.
So it's an AVE, AVS,
Yeah,
AVSE, SVSAVE, or whatever they called it at that time.
yeah. I clipped the kill switch wire right at the ignition because I guess there was trouble with kill switch wires, but I clipped that right at the ignition. But sometimes it'll still get hot and just die. My father thought it might be a coil or something, but I
Yeah,
thought maybe you.
they changed that over to a different coil design. I don't know which one you have. The first ones were a, a Bosch unit that was very similar to the one that worked with the points, and they just added a separate chip, trigger chip, to it. And then 2 or 3 years after that, I think they started to produce it with a one-piece coil and trigger. So I don't know which one that you have. I might not be thinking about the right one, but I think so. But the one thing that I found sometimes was the ground under the coil, the aluminum or magnesium would oxidize. So if you pull that plate, your coil off of it, if it's got a plate on there, that was the middle one. Um, you could pull it off and sand just a little bit to clear the oxidation off under it. What it is the coil grounds to the plate and to the crankcase. So
Hmm.
if there's any oxidation, it'll cause a weak spark.
Hmm. Well, thank you, sir.
Check that.
Yeah.
There was two different versions, and the later ones they were pretty bulletproof when they came up with the one piece. I think that went on that one. I may be thinking about the 038s, but I think it was on the 56 too. And they went from the Bosch. They put an electronic chip on there for the trigger, like you'd see on 4 cycles and stuff at that time. And then they changed over to a one-piece coil that had the trigger built into it, and that took a different mounting plate. Might even been a crankcase change at that time, but you'd have to look at the parts, illustrated parts list, and see when that change was. But either one, I see that over the years as a issue with the ignitions, and a lot of times, people say, "Well, I'm not getting a good hot spark," so what they do, this coil, so they pull it off, and then they put another one on there. Well, when they screw the screws back into it, it works too, and that old coil was in good shape. In a lot of cases, it's just the ground.
Hmm. You have to look at that. It just
Those parts are probably getting kind of scarce now too, huh?
yeah, I reckon. I think they make some sort of uh, chip or some sort of module you can replace. I don't know
Well,
if it's for point saws or what it's for, but I've seen it around.
yeah, that's the trigger I was saying that they added when they took the point system out. It was basically the same coil, and you added a trigger chip to it, and it just it bolted in, to the plate where like the condenser would bolt in, and that was an electronic trigger that worked off of the magnetic field. And then after that, they updated to I think a one-piece coil. They changed the mount, and maybe even a crankcase change to make the mount. And then, best I remember, that's been years ago. And then shortly after that, they kind of discontinued it. So when the 64 came out, and but that I had just about everything in the field was 38 Magnums and 56 Supers and 56 Mag 2s. And then I took 064s out, did a lot of the testing with the 064 and 034 when those design changes came out. All over the place.
Well, I probably better let you get on with your evening there, Mr. Ard.
There's not a whole lot going on. I thought we might see some more, but what happens is guys call me up later and say, yeah, these live videos and stuff, people watch them for weeks after, so it does some good. But I appreciate you taking the time, and
Oh, my pleasure. You helped me quite a bit.
and
I'm surprised your channel doesn't get more traffic being
well,
being a disciple of Soren and whatnot and really knowing your stuff. I guess everybody wants
most of I found that the social medias is a little more entertainment, and I kind of too, that I got several of them I watch pretty regular, and but it's kind of to fill time instead of learning stuff. But I tell you, I've since I started setting up all this computer stuff and all, which I'm still not real good at it, but since I started setting it all up, I go in there and I put on a video, and then pretty soon I'm back in here twiddling something else, adding something different. And YouTube and Facebook and Instagram has been a educational process for me. So, but yeah,
is there
but it's fun.
yeah, well, hats off to you for doing it.
Well, thank you, Lee. I
We
appreciate it.
appreciate you sharing all you have to share, and we
Well, thank you.
appreciate you. We look forward to you sharing more.
Well, drop by on Thursday nights at 8 o'clock. I've got 4 or 5 guys that are kind of part of a panel that we put together, and I've had some trouble over the past few weeks with sound and video and stuff myself, but it's starting to come together now, and those guys check in and stuff. So if you're interested in being on the
Yeah,
panel, drop by and just
yeah,
I'll send you a link out because we got several people. Dwayne Newstetter from up in Canada. He's got Arbor, Canada. He's been in the business a long, long time, and I don't know if you've ever watched Tim O'Brien, Cotton Top 3.
yeah. I saw you and you two did a video. He was really impressed with you, and
Yeah, Tim drops by, and
he did a video with you at your place, I believe.
yeah, yeah, and David Breeden with Husqvarna, and Chris Childs, God's Pick Crew, and that Warren Causey's been dropping in. He's with this a disaster group, and so it's a lot of good conversations. We've been talking about horizontal trees and felling and all kinds of different things. So enjoy having you in on the input.
Yeah,
If you know of anybody, I do have the. You can check on there. I've got some a 2 hour basic chainsaw Zoom class. That next one is like the 22nd, I think, of April. I've got a chainsaw clinic I'm gonna be doing on March the 25th, I think. that's a 1 hour. Probably go a little longer than 1 hour because I get to talking. But that's out. And then we've got some hands-on programs. One's in Virginia, and if you know of anybody, it's going to be in the Danville area, and so be at the Dry
Let's
Creek,
see.
I think it is Dry Fork, Virginia. That's
Danville's at the western end, isn't
it's straight down below Richmond, I think, not too far down.
it? Mm.
I think the Dry Fork is just above Danville actually, and so at property up there, so it'll
Yeah,
be
that'd be fun.
that'd be the 24th, 25th, 20. Let's see, I can't remember dates anymore, but that's 25th, 26th, 27th of April. We'll be in Cardi Blueberry Farm. That's in Dry Fork, Virginia. That one's wide open, so if you know of anybody. The one in Georgia we've got going for the 2nd through the 4th in April is pretty much booked up, but I'll have some of the legacy instructors will be at that one also. So that's 3-day hands-on. And I will be up there for that one to finish up on the legacy instructor program for 2023, and probably going to finish up 2024 there also.
So you say Dry Fork is the 24th, 5th, and 6th?
25th, 26th, 27th. So it's
Oh, okay.
Friday and Saturday that week. But there's a video.
We can find that on your website.
Yeah, it's on the website on the homepage, and also there's a couple videos explaining it on the YouTube site.
Well, thank you, sir.
All right. And
So
good sawing to you.
we'll see you Thursday.
Very good. Very good.
All right.
8 p.m.
Thank.
Eastern. 8 p.m. Eastern.
Well, thank you for everything, Tom.
All right. Talk to you later.
Yes, sir.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Very good conversations. And hope there'll be some more drop in, but Lee was quite knowledgeable and ended up with some good chatting back and forth. So we've got a few more watching. Any questions or situations? I've got not a lot on the chats. But I just explained to him, if you were listening, about the upcoming hands-on classes, as well as the ones I have lined up for Zoom sessions coming up in March and April. And a lot of stuff going on. A little bit more time. I think I'm gonna play one. I don't know if you saw it or not. Let me see what I have here. One on show a little bit of this on saw chain. I've got a chain clinic that I'm going to be doing on March the 25th. It's like $15. Going to be I've got it listed as an hour. It's probably going to be more than an hour, but give you a little bit of an idea of some of the stuff that we talk about here. Hopefully this works. Let's see. class, and it was on a day 3 of our program, and I had large pine log marked for him to cut through. He hadn't operated a chainsaw much before, but he was using my saw, and more or less he cut down through it. He worked down through the wood very nicely. He got to the end of it, but I kept watching him. He went through the wood and went into the ground about 4 or 5 inches. And he stopped and he said, "How did I do?" I said, "Well, you did great till you went into the dirt down here with my saw." And he said, "Oh, I didn't hit the ground." I said, "Oh, you did too. Look over here. Looks like a ditch witch trench." He said, "Oh my goodness, I didn't mean to do that." I said, "Well, don't be sorry." I said, "I've hit asphalt and rocks and all kinds of different dirt situations, and it's just going to happen. But how we're going to be able to keep that from happening is looking. We have to make sure that we observe what we're cutting and watch it the whole time so it doesn't get into a material we don't want to cut." So, what happens though when something is damaged? We have to repair it. If you've ever had a chainsaw start to cut sideways, left or right, what do you think causes that? In reality, it's one of 2 things usually. I mean, you can have a worn bar, and a lot of people talk about that, but most of the time, the 2 parts that really make a difference are the depth gauge and the point. So when we start to look at here, as we start to look at the parts of the tooth, there's 5 parts in the design that we need to be more or less aware of to be able to either sharpen or to be able to pick another saw chain before we go to work with it. The first one out here, some people call it a drag. Technically, a lot of the material calls it a raker, after old cross-cut raker tooth on a handsaw. And then the more technical term for it is it's a depth gauge. It sets up how thick the chip is that's going to come off of this particular tooth. That dimension out of the box is usually about 25 thousandths of an inch below this part. This part is called the working corner or the point. Now going back to cutting crooked, if you think about it here, if you look from this point back here to the back, the problem is that it goes downhill. And so as we sharpen or grind this back, the point gets lower. And when that happens, it's going to raise the depth gauge. So we need to make sure that we understand that and that we think through the process of it has to be adjusted. Now, as we start to look at another situation is that, let's take, for instance, we do take more off this tooth over here than we do on the left tooth. And in that case, it starts to adjust that for us, doesn't it? So let's say we have the right side cutters are a little bit shorter than the left because we've applied more pressure to it. And we have the depth gauge that's set the same. Which one would be more aggressive? Which side is it going to pull to? It's going to pull to the longer side tooth because the shorter side is going to be taking less bite with that same depth gauge setting. And then also just having the damage on the right side. And the reason why I know that is you could take and get a good sharp saw chain, brand new, and even put it into the wood. It's cutting nice and straight. Take yourself a flat file, knock about 5 or 6 points off of it, put it back in the wood. If you made those damage points on the right side, it's going to cut to the left immediately, or vice versa. So those 2 things, the depth gauge and the point, can keep you cutting straight and also feeding into the fiber. Any damage on that working corner or point is going to start to decrease your cutting capacity. So we want to make sure that we understand that. The next part is over here. This is called the side plate of the tooth. And this side plate really does the toughest work. It has to cross-cut the fibers in the long log or limb. And I had many times people ask me, what size file should I have for my particular saw chain? And several years ago, I got into that conversation with a chain engineer. And he said, do people ask you about what size file you should have? I said, yeah, quite often. He said, what do you tell them? I said, well, you have to really go back to the manufacturer's equipment manuals. And I do agree that that's probably one of the quickest and best places to find it. But there are several situations where they might say to use this on this tooth and this on this tooth as far as size-wise. And both chain sizes are the same, but the actual file you're going to be using might be a little bit smaller or larger diameter. And how he explained it is 1/5 or 20% of the cross-section or diameter of the file should actually be above the point, and we know what that is now, if it's in the proper position. So if I illustrate it this way, if I were to take this into 5 parts, 1/5 of it being above that point, then you would look for a visual of 90 degrees from that point to where the file rests in the gullet area. And so if we understand that, we're looking for a 90 degree. Some chains actually have a witness mark over here on the side that'll show you what that angle should be, that visual should be. And so if I were to take this out, as you can see here, see if I can erase some of this. This is what the side of the tooth would look like if it's in the proper configuration. Now, alternative to that, and that would be what we call a hook. And that's what's illustrated here. If I were to take this out now, you can see that file was down below that point. And if your chain looks like this, it's not correct. You need to make sure that it looks like the one on the left. The one on the right is going to dull quickly. It's going to grab into the material more. But the other thing is it can cause it to rock and roll and increase the chances of reactive forces taking place also. The third one I have down here, this is called a back slope. And the situation with that we usually find on smaller chainsaws like bucket saws, climbing saws, or especially on pole saws. Pole saws use an extended pitch 3/8 chain, smaller profile, or a low profile 3/25 pitch. And so what happens is if you use a bigger file diameter on that, like this one you can see it's back, you end up with the point back behind the file and you end up with a back slope on the tooth. And it takes a lot of pressure trying to get that to cut. So we want to think about understanding that side plate, making sure that looks concave, but still a visual 90 degrees vertical there. So depth gauge, the point, and the side. The fourth one is up here. This is called the top plate of the tooth. You can see I have a witness mark on that also. That lets us know when that tooth is worn out. It also helps us to align that front angle. The top angle sets up the width of the kerf. The kerf is the slot that it makes into the fiber, the wood. And so more angle you have up to a point here, it moves this tooth to this side, this tooth to this side to open the width of the kerf. You must have a width opening for the bar and chain to go down through without binding. So that's one that you really need to watch. Most full chisel chains are about 25 degrees on this front side. That full chisel is square side, square top. Semi-chisel tooth, which usually has a rounded corner here, that usually goes 30 to 35 degrees. And the reason for that is it takes more movement to the side for that tooth to clear the chip on a semi-chisel tooth. So that's something on the top angle that we have to understand. And then number 5, the fifth one, is underneath the top plate. And that's called the top plate chisel angle. The chisel angle really scoops that chip out between the verticals. And that's usually set about, we say 45 degrees, like the front end of a flat chisel. But more or less, it's usually between 50 to 55 degrees that does that peeling action of the chip. So the depth, the point, the side, the top, and the chisel. Now, if we could look at kind of an illustration here that kind of talks about, let's say that this is a block of wood and we're going to chisel out a opening here to more or less install, say, a hinge. I take a flat chisel, if this were one, which would have a beveled edge on it. I have a point here, point here. I could even mark it for 1/4 inch deep. And then I could take here and I drive that point in with the bevel to the inside. I drive this in and I do several verticals here that make this long area. And then I go over the width of my hinge or whatever. I turn the chisel over. I do the same thing on this side. So I've created 2 verticals, and both of them are the width of what chip I want to take out. Now I take that chisel and I chisel out between the 2 verticals. And that's exactly the chiseling process that your cutting tooth does on your saw chain. The left one and right one work together to actually take the whole chip out. So if we understand that, what we're setting up are cutting surfaces, in other words, correct angles, very sharp surfaces to be able to take that chip out with very little resistance and holding it in proper angles. So 5 parts, that's what we're looking at. And so this is a little bit of lore here to talk about as far as the design on this. You know, up until the middle 40s, all right, a lot of chain stuff. And that's 5 parts of the tooth go through, kind of the basics of it, and then get into a little bit of how the file or grinder system or whatever works with that. And so once you understand those basics, you can just about sharpen with a lot of different tools, you know, just the file or looking at different apparatus for holding the file or what we call a file guide. And then also there's battery powered Dremel types. There's desk units as far as sets up on a tool bench to be able to grind. So a lot of different things, and so it's pretty neat once you understand those basics. I just put up there again on the site there as far as how to zoom in. If you haven't, just you can copy that link over or use that. If you have Zoom on your phone or your computer, you can use that ID and password or click on the link and it'll take you in there to it. And we'll discuss a little bit about what you have as far as experience in who taught you what you know about chainsaws. In other words, are you one that learns completely by the seat of your pants, or is it someone, a parent or a coworker or brother, sister, or whatever that taught you about the chainsaw? And so that's what we're talking about tonight. It's a project that I'm working on that's called From Here to There. And that's getting information from one head to the other, from here to there. And when it comes to chainsaws, that's an important thing that we share that information. And so tonight, hopefully, is to give people some thought process of considering what can happen or what takes place. And so I saw one on here is kind of interesting from Robert Davies. He said, "Hi Tim, got my training during a forestry course at community college here in New Brunswick, Canada, and my instructor spent a few days with Soren, and this was in 1984. And yeah, I was getting started with Soren during that time frame, and he spent some time up with doing some training with the Canadian." Distributors up there with steel, and then also we went up to Nova Scotia and did some about that time, and there was also some of the work that he did with Scott Paper was up through there. So that was back a few years ago. Good to hear from you. Thank you very much. And if you can drop by. Zoom in, we'll talk about some of that, or Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern time, we have Thursday night saws. If you're available on that, we talk about some different topics of training as well as looking at different techniques and things. And so it's always good to learn what other people know. And so that's it. Just had a very great conversation with I don't know if you heard or not, but Lee Doken, I guess it is Doken. He was from up in Richmond, Virginia area. We were talking about different saws and all that he has now, and so but that's quite interesting to talk and listen to how people have learned what they know, and so that. Keep this all going. But I do have some swag over here, and I left a message, and I've got a couple of these, and I'm hoping that Lee, you check back by. This is a special edition Husqvarna cap, that if since you participated, I've got one of these for you tonight, and because you're the only one that's logged in. So if you email me at info@forestapps.com, I will get your address and send this to you. Really nice, kind of like a Carhartt material. Really nice. And I've got a couple other types too. But, you see this one, and this one's I think a little bit smaller, but I guess it's adjustable on the back. But it's a special edition also from a few years ago. So just some things to think through there. If you check in tonight on log in on Zoom, I will give you a chance at one of those also. Find out where your training came in to be. Got just about 15 more minutes and we'll be finishing up. So any questions or comments that you have, and try to get them on here tonight. But Thursday night saws, we've had some interesting conversations on storm trees. I've got kind of a panel. One's a Husqvarna rep from Georgia, and we have one of God's Pick Crew. They're a chainsaw organizer from up in Virginia. That's part of the panel. We've got Warren Causey from Georgia. He's one of the panels with the disaster group here in Georgia, and does a lot of storm chasing around. And then you've got some other folks who have had some experience with the saw in hand, and so we have a great panel to be able to answer your questions and talk about some different things of different types of saws and equipment, and also from a training standpoint. So that's Thursday night saws live. And what I do is I put them out live, and then I go back and edit and I repost a video that'll be on the standard YouTube video channel. Usually it casts over into Facebook also, but it's about an hour long that we do on Thursday nights. So if you get a chance, drop in on that. Leave your messages and things. Hello, John Chafin. How are you doing? You're just getting out of the woods, I guess. It's been dark for an hour or two. But I'm doing pretty good. And then I saw some on Facebook the other day that keeping you busy up there, West Virginia. Looked like the snow had cleaned out for the past week or so, anyway. But zoom in and tell me what you're up to. You can check in on your phone or whatever. I put a link there. You can just get on Zoom, put in that ID and passcode you see here, and that'll bring you in live on my Zoom call. So you've been working steady. It's rain coming back your way though, isn't it? It just passed through here yesterday, and I think it's coming back again tomorrow. So it's probably headed to West Virginia next. What did you tell me a few weeks back? What saws are you running now? You got anything new? What are you doing? John Chafin? Hey, Glenn Moore. How are you doing? South Carolina checking in, huh? Been sawing and splitting firewood this morning. Seems like a pretty good pastime. I was cleaning out an RV today. Got to take it up tomorrow. After the wreck I got the Freightliner portion of it finished up, but we've got some issues where it's set up during the Roanoke, Virginia freeze here over the past few weeks. He's still running a 372. That's a good saw. There's no doubt about it. It's hard to beat. They keep trying to take them out of the lineup, but they keep putting it back in because so many people use them, and it's a pretty high torque unit. Does a good job. So he says the best saw ever made, huh? Probably so. Could be. If it works for you, it's best enough or good enough, isn't it? You still got the one that you want in game logging? You got it just set up somewhere? Where was, I can't remember what you told me. Where was the competition on that? Was that Duffield? I had a guy who was on one of the basic chainsaw Zoom workshops last week, and he was from up in that area. So you got it up in your bedroom, just sitting there looking at it. Oh yeah, you were at the regional up in Boonville. That was the national that you won that one out, wasn't it? That was national that year, wasn't it? Right, at Boonville, because they had the New York finals, and then they had the national there. A few years ago. You're a lot older now. So barbecue at the church on the 24th. That sounds like a deal, Glenn. I wish I could. We'll see. I don't know. I guess we maybe going up 85. I'll have to look and see. 50 years old. You're making me feel bad now, John. I mean, they're not making me feel bad. You're just making me feel old. You were just a young feller then, but you were beating all the old guys. Now you're an old guy beating older guys or young guys, one of the two. I'll have to look, Glenn. I maybe coming up 85. It's not too far off there. Yeah, you're not far off 85 there. I'll have to look. I don't know which way I'm going up. I've got to be up there on the. I've got to be up there on the. Well, yeah, I guess I'll be driving on the 24th. So we'll see. That's on a Wednesday, huh? Is that right? No, that's not on Wednesday. I'm thinking about the. Let me see again. I'm gonna go to April. No, that's right. It is. 24th is on a Wednesday. I miss the competitions too, John. It was always fun. They still got them going on up in. They hold it still at Boonville. Bill Linloff is still running them up there. There's about 5 or 6. Yeah, but that Sunday, Glenn. I'll be going up in April. So you're thinking about March. Yeah, March the 24th is on a Sunday. I'll be going up the 24th of April. That session's in April. But you can deliver. I will be glad to try some. You just have to deliver it. Well, I've had a good night talking about stuff and chatting with folks. And I hope Lee gets the message to contact me back. He said he's going to drop by Thursday night, so I'll tell him then. We had one person that got in on the Zoom call, so I got that recorded. But hoping that we're able to do a couple more of these over the next couple of weeks. I'm trying to get this project together, looking at what's the ratios of who was trained when. In other words, I think that most people they start off with family or a local group, or either they start off with a company of a tree care or logging, and they are an employee, and somebody in that crew is showing them the ranks as far as chainsaw operation and all goes. And then some people are starting off themselves, kind of seat of the pants with working with the saw, cutting either firewood or cleanup, and sometimes they're working with disaster groups and as volunteers. And so it's so important that we think about kind of getting information from here to there. And even if you have had the time and hopefully the ability to learn things without incidents taking place, that you take your experience and share it with others. And Soren was always big about that. So many places we'd go is kind of like, I don't tell this, I don't want everybody to know all this kind of stuff. But Soren was one is, chainsaws are something that we need to share. And it's kind of an international language too. Everybody in all parts of the world use chainsaws, and or maybe hand saws. They're using saws, but it's something where as you start to take trees or you start to work up storm stuff, it's so important that people understand the things of sharpening and how it should run and reactive forces, and then a few basic planning processes so they can at least come up with whether or not they need to turn around and do something different. So that's the process. So. All right, John. Thanks for dropping by again, and drop back by Thursday night. We'll see you. Yeah, I'm sure you'll be back in by then, and we'll go from there again. But about time to wrap this one up. And I'm going to try to put something out again and maybe do something later this week, because I'd like to get a few more comments in on how you learned about chainsaws, or maybe you can tell about how somebody else learned about chainsaws. But we want to start up this project of getting it from here to there. So I want to say thank all of you for dropping by, and I hope that everyone is enjoying a good, safe week this week. And if I can help with anything, send me an email at info@forestapps.com, or check out our website at www.forestapps.com, or you can check us out on Facebook and YouTube @Forest Apps, and that'll get in touch with me. So leave a question or an answer. And we'll also, if there is a video that you would like to have for your group, or looking at different topics, please let me know, and we'll try to put something together and put it out on the YouTube site and the Facebook site. So hopefully help someone out. So thank you all, and good.